call this meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Open comment period. The Transportation Policy Board will allow speakers from the audience to comment on any transportation-related issue that is not on the agenda. During the course of the meeting, audience members will be given an opportunity to discuss each item in the order in which it appears on the agenda after the board has discussed the item. Speakers will be allowed 3 minutes for their comments. Again, so just to reemphasize that folks are welcome to speak during the open comment period. If I'm sure there's going to be folks who'd like to speak on a particular agenda item, but those public comments will be heard after the board has had its discussion on that item. Okay, so do we have any folks signed up for open comment period?
Yes, there's a couple that didn't get an item, but most of them would be 717 for the SAM.
Could you repeat that? I'm so sorry.
There's a couple of people that did sign up. They're for item 4 and 7, but the ones that don't have an item would be SAM.
Is there a SAM in the audience who signed up for public comments? Is there anyone else?
Emma from NCA.
Oh. Emma Schwartz, Medical Center of the Americas.
Somebody can grab her.
Item 4 for Emma.
Is there a stand outside in the hallway also?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I notice in the agenda that item 4 is to approve the mobility plan that includes the evaluation and prioritization project. And the actual presentation and report that we talked about the last meeting from TxDOT is in the report section, item 7. It seems to me that we ought to have item 7 with that presentation made before we take up item 4, because otherwise, item 4 already calls for action, and part of the discussion is to have the public get the presentation on the Reimagine project before we make a decision as to whether or not we're going to prioritize that project. So I don't know if it requires a motion or whether you can just do that, but it seems to me that, and especially since a lot of the people that are here, as I just heard, are wanting to comment on item 4 and 7, it seems to me they had to see the presentation on item 7, so it might impact the comments.
I mean, I'll entertain input from staff and TxDOT. I mean, just to be clear, I don't want to conflate the two. I'm open to that if the board chooses to vote as such. Reimagine I-10 is a corridor study regarding I-10. It's not what we're voting on in terms of the approval relating to item number 4. I feel that's going to be something we're going to have to clarify repeatedly with the public today and for members of the board. Reimagine I-10 has been going on for many years. TxDOT can perhaps speak to that and what exactly the corridor study is. But again, I just don't want the public to be confused that item 7 is somehow what is going to ultimately be approved or weaved into item 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, well, yeah, I understand that concern, but item 7 is what we talked at length about last month, to give the public more information on that particular project, and so that people can understand what the implications are. Item 4 is actually voting on the mobility plan that includes the prioritization process that includes as a keystone project the Reimagine I-10 portion.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't include the Reimagine I-10 portions. Again, and perhaps TxDOT can speak again to the Reimagine I-10 process. But just to be clear, it's not what's incorporated into item 4. And although I-10 and the segments of I-10 are going to be voted on item 4, it's not, and I don't mean to cause confusion on this. The reason item 7 was placed on there was to provide as much information as possible regarding everything that has been done and looked at, for the sake of transparency regarding I-10. But I just don't want to conflate the two, that the recommendations or alternatives or whatever has been come up with so far in the corridor study is not what's going to be folded into necessarily item 4.
But item 4 includes, as it indicates here, evaluation prioritization project.
Yes,
And that
I-10.
was one of the items that in the last 2 months we were told we needed to make a decision on the prioritization of those projects. And one of those projects that's listed as a keystone in the prioritization process is
Yes, sir.
the I-10. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. I hear
So
you.
if the idea was to give people more opportunity to understand what the project is about and all that, and for those of us who are going to vote on item 4, at least for me, it would be helpful to see the presentation and to see what kind of questions come up on it before I take a vote on item 4.
You are correct. The Reimagine I-10 is simply a corridor study, and we are at the conclusion of the corridor studies to identify purpose and need for I-10. But in either case, to keep this simple, if you wish to move it up in the agenda, if at all possible, we're ready to present the Reimagine I-10.
And as staff, we're ready to move it up and have item 7 before item 4. I would just recommend that we keep the action items in case we start losing quorum. Let's take care of the action items, and then we can do item 7, have that presentation, and then move on to item 10.
Okay.
Question.
All right, so then I would move up that report before item 4.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to move up item 7 before we discuss item 4. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. So the item will be moved up before item 4. Let's continue on with discussion and action items number 1.
Item number 1 is to approve the minutes for November 15, 2019 TPB meeting.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the minutes for the November 15, 2019 meeting. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Next item.
Discussion and action to approve recommendations from the executive committee on pursuant to the legal services agreements entered in April 2nd, 2018, that the TPB authorized Kent Smith to provide legal services in excess of the 80 hours permitted by the agreement scope of services.
Good.
I can take care of that. So with this item, we are bringing to the board, the attention of the board, that the contract that we have with Kent Smith has 2 ceilings, or two maximum. One is 80 hours, and the other one is a dollar amount of $29,000 and change. We're getting very close to the 80 hours. So what we are asking the board is to allow us to go beyond the 80 hours, given that the dollar amount that is specified in the contract was estimated with a higher hourly rate. We're not exceeding the dollar amount. So all we're asking is for the board to allow us to go beyond the 80 hours, and that'll take us through the end of March, which is when the new cycle kicks in. Right? So the agreement specifically says that we need to come to the board and ask for authorization if we go beyond the 80 hours. So that's what we're doing.
Make a motion to
Now,
approve.
the dollar amount is not changing.
Second.
There's a motion and seconds to approve the item to provide legal services in excess of 80 hours as permitted by the agreement. Services. Those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item 3. This is, I'm sorry, this is I didn't mean to cause confusion. This is just really a housekeeping item for clarification. As you recall, when we were discussing previously amendments to the bylaws, regarding absences and training and other things. When we were looking at that, there was some just clarity or clarification that wanted just to be made that the executive committee can look at those items before coming to the TPB, and there was just some confusion to that. The conclusion was made that rather than having to go to the TPB, get permission, go back to the EC, and then come back to the TPB with the recommendation, that the EC can ultimately just look at items and then bring them forward to the TPB for final approval. Didn't want to cause confusion, just wanted to, it's really just there for clarification. If anybody has any questions on that. Okay, that was just for discussion on it. Next item. All right, so next item, we need item number 7. So the reimagining.
Yeah.
Good morning, board members. We're going on this Texas project manager for Reimagine I-10 corridor study. Here we have just a quick update on our corridor study. As it was mentioned before, the corridor study has been going on for about 3 years. We're in the process of concluding the study. There's going to be a report with an implementation plan and potential order of projects. And we have contracted HDR to help us out with this study. So at this point, I'll pass it over to Brad.
Great. Thanks, Hugo. As Hugo said, we're wrapping up the feasibility study on Reimagine. We're getting ready to move into the next phase of project development. Some of y'all have probably seen some of these slides, but I just kind of wanted to walk through kind of some of the things we're looking at for those that aren't. It's a 55-mile corridor study that goes from the New Mexico state line down to the Tornillo area, or FM 3380. It contains a number of elements other than just the local traffic, including 5 ports of entry. It's got the number 3 busiest truck border port in the U.S. in 2017. There's a lot of movement of import and export coming through this area. And because of that, our initial traffic analysis determined that we're looking at, in the year 2042, about 303,000 vehicles a day on the I-10 corridor itself. And so what that looks like as far as operations go in 2042 is it looks at like a 26-mile-an-hour average speed in the corridor during the peak period, and about an 81% increase in commute time over what they are today. As part of that project, we went through 6 main goals. We looked at mobility and circulation, and that includes the safety component as well, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. We looked at a high-level environmental overview and what sort of impacts might be expected as we move into the next phase. We looked at multimodal. How can we look at other things other than just your normal passenger cars on the freeway? Look at bicycle, pedestrian, and transit, and how that might be integrated into the solution. We looked at value on how to provide a different type of look at the project to provide other opportunities for investment. Design was a big item because currently the bridges in the corridor do not meet the 18.5 clearance requirement, and there's some other geometrical constraints and modifications that were proposed as part of the project. And then lastly is technology, because we wanted to look at, as we're moving into 2042, there's a lot that's going to happen between now and then, and we wanted technology to be part of the solution to help us minimize any kind of impacts. As Hugo said, we're wrapping up. We started about 3 years ago, and we've had 3 rounds of public outreach that we went out to the public to get input, to provide information back. Now we're wrapping that information up and looking to wrap up the feasibility study. This graphic just is a real quick graph to point out that we have been out talking to the public and organized meetings about over 45 times. We tried to touch the public and get feedback. And this includes, see down the list there, 3 times we've met with the MPO and this group in this room. It does not include, this list does not include items where we looked at special events. We went out to the Chihuahuas game, we went out to several other events to try to get information out to the public and solicit feedback back as well. So we've got a lot of good information, and it really has helped to kind of guide the study as we move along. One of the big things, I'll talk a little bit about transportation issues in the El Paso, Santa Cruz, and Chihuahua region. According to the sources you see there, we're looking at growth in employment and population. 76, we saw growth between 1990 and 2017 of 70, over 70% and over almost 60% in population growth. So there has been a lot of growth looking backwards. Looking forwards, though, we also know that El Paso County is growing as well. Currently, populations are roughly around 841,000 as of 2019. And based on some of the Destino model and some other sources, we're looking at estimated population in 2045 anywhere from 1.4 or in the 1.4 or 1.2 million range. And so that's kind of what we looked at as we evaluated the study. We went through a number of different traffic analysis, and we started with looking at existing traffic counts and calibrated those numbers to the current the Horizon model, and then also checked back with the Destino model as well. But we also looked at the TxDOT STARS data and a number of other items to find out what is the growth rate along the corridor and what can we expect in between now and 2045. And based on all that analysis, we determined that the growth rate to be used in the corridor was 2% between 2017 and 2037, and then it plateaus off to 1.5% after that is for part of our traffic analysis. So based on all that, that's where we got the 303,000 vehicles per day in the peak period, or I'm sorry, in the day. This is a graphic we've shown in past meetings, and it shows kind of what it would look like. And we're just showing segment 2 here, but the same can be said for segment 3. This is if we don't do anything on I-10, and we let the traffic grow to where it's proposed to grow to in 2042. And you can see quite a bit of traffic congestion, especially in the eastbound side. We talked about this before. The westbound side not showing a lot of traffic, and you'll see why as we get into the downtown areas, because it's being clogged by some of the ramp congestion that's occurring in the downtown area. So that's why you're seeing not a lot of traffic getting through. It's kind of metering out that traffic coming through the other way. But the bottom line, the story is it's got a lot of congestion and a lot of traffic if we don't do anything. But not just on the I-10 corridor itself, also on the surface streets. And you can see as we're at UTAP right there, and as we turn the corner going into downtown, you can see a lot of the congestion on the surface streets in the downtown area. So we wanted to also see how it might impact those downtown areas as well. So as we approach the downtown, you can see on the westbound side, right there at the Missouri ramp, you can see why it wasn't allowing traffic to get through. And then as you approach Cotton and US 54, it's really just a parking lot in 2042 with the amount of traffic that's trying to squeeze through the existing bottlenecks and the existing ramping issues that are currently out there.
Can I ask a question, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman? On this congestion issue, and I know we're talking about I-10, but those maps don't show the congestion in other parts of the city, like Spur 61 and Loop 375, or you've got the same thing in the Far East side along Zaragoza and George Dieter. Is there a reason why those are not included, so we can get a sense of the congestion?
We have those numbers. We have a very similar graphic for segment 3 that goes from 54 down to 375. For the sake of time, it shows the same thing. It shows a lot of congestion in both directions. So for the sake of time, I didn't want to run through that exact same graphic as well. That does bring up a point that I failed to make. One key thing that I wanted to point out is all of the traffic analysis that we did on this, so the traffic that you're seeing, that congestion you're seeing on I-10, it factors in the addition of the Borderland Expressway project. So that project has already pulled traffic off of I-10 to move out to the Borderland Expressway. It's already pulled traffic off based on the Border West project and the Montana and all the other projects that show up in the current model are already factored into that traffic analysis. So that's as if those projects have already been built. That's the traffic that's going to end up on I-10. So that's a point that needs to be made. Some of the other things we looked at that were key were pavement issues. We did a pavement analysis throughout the entire corridor study. You can see 5 main areas that were significant, where we know that pavement's going to be an issue in the not too distant future that we needed to account for in our feasibility study. It helps with prioritization, and it helps us identify potential projects. We also took a look at incident management. There are several areas of the corridor that don't have continuous frontage roads, and that's one thing we wanted to take a look at on how we can help incident management. There's a big area, as there's a big accident on I-10, there are not a lot of options for where you move traffic, so we wanted to factor that into any kind of analysis that we did. We also, and so we took a look at the crash hotspots.
I have a question. Can I ask you, could you explain more what you mean by pavement issue and those 4 or 5 areas that you identified?
Sure, and once again, this is a high-level analysis we did. We did some field work, but it was looking at ride quality. It was looking at the smoothness, as well as some of the potholing and some of the other issues that were going on in the area. As you all know, there's been a lot of Band-Aid fixes to I-10 through the years, and so we're looking at how can we make some of these adjustments to address some of those longer-term issues with that. So there were 2 main things. It was ride stability and pavement smoothness. So,
Thank you.
So we did take a look at crash hotspots, and this was a key area that we wanted to take a look at. You can see specific to segment 2 in the Porfirio Diaz area down to US 54, and then also at airport to Loma Land. You can see that those are two of the key areas that we saw a lot of hotspots and accidents over the years, including fatalities. So those are some areas that we wanted to flag and to identify and help with prioritization, and also to address some of the issues moving forward. Also, the I-10 bridges along the corridor. There are 202 bridges along the corridor. 31 of these bridges are classified as functionally obsolete, and meaning they're reaching the end of their design life. And if we forecast out to 2042, they're going to be beyond their life. 28 bridges currently do not meet the proposed or the required vertical clearance of 18.5 feet that is new on interstate highways. This does include the segment 2 in the downtown area. Segment 2, I think, had 23 bridges included in that segment. And then segment 3 also has a number of those bridges as well. So this is all a key element we want to look at. The last stat down there, the little diagram, shows that these bridges along this corridor are looking at 64% that are over 50 years old, and the statewide average is at 44%. So you see that the bridges are, compared to the statewide averages, are pretty old bridges. So we took all that information and we tried to develop a solution that would start to address some of these issues. We started off looking at just operational issues. What if we modified ramps and eliminated some of the bottlenecks? How much benefit would that get us? Would that get us over the hump and solve the congestion problem? When we did that, we ran the numbers and we were able to solve some of it, but still it would not solve it all. So we went to the next step. What is a corridor-wide solution? And this included some capacity addition, the use of what we're calling adaptive lanes, which provide an opportunity to provide express transit or truck lanes as part of the corridor, but maybe in the future they're adaptive and can adjust to other things like autonomous vehicles or electrified vehicles or other things as well in the future. Provide some flexibility and some future proofing on that side. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, technology played a big role. We want to use technology to the best benefit that we can to help us minimize how much pavement we're having to put down and how much reliance we're having to pay specifically on the I-10 corridor. Is there ways for routing? Are there ways for, one of the things we looked at was truck parking. How can we get some of the trucks from queuing up into the system and maybe have them queue up offline and come onto the system when they're ready to go across to the port of entry or something to that effect. So we looked at several different ways to input or infiltrate technology into it as well. The point was we want to keep pace with the demand as best we can through a series of projects that are being built over time. That instead of just patchworking this solution together, it's building to an overall solution that at the end we've addressed that 2042 traffic volume. So based on all that, and I mentioned before that we looked at the numbers, we incorporated the Borderland Expressway, the Border Highway West project, Montana, even some of the city projects like the Campbell City project as well as others. We even did a sensitivity test to see what would happen at the Border Highway if we modified how much traffic was actually using the Border Highway, and we assumed that maybe some more would use it. And we did some sensitivity on that. And based on all that, much like the no-build video that I showed earlier, this is what happens on the build scenario with the same amount of traffic in 2042. And you can see that with all the operational improvements that we were proposing in the feasibility study, and some of the corridor-wide solutions and the technology that really provide a system that flows well, functions well, and addresses the demand in the corridor. And as I said, much like the no build showed a lot of the roadways that were off system, off the corridor that were really clogging up. And as we turn the corner and go into downtown, you'll see that a lot of the street network has now cleared up and is moving much freer and much more efficiently. And it's really does address that 303,000 vehicles a day on the corridor as well. Part of that solution, as I mentioned, was the removal of bottlenecks. And so in some areas, that means we need auxiliary lanes to make ramps work better. So there are some areas that may be wider than other areas. The downtown area is a bit of a bottleneck area right now, so that was one of the areas we took a look at. How can we improve flow? And you can see, as you go through the downtown area, you look at the surface streets like on Missouri there are flowing well. Campbell and those on and off ramps are flowing well, and we're able to move that traffic through there. So just to kind of tie this into a couple of miles per hour, you can see that with the no build in a couple of areas, we're looking at 27 and 16 miles an hour, and then with the recommended concept, the concept that we're looking to move forward into the next phase for a further evaluation, we're looking at 60 miles an hour as that speed. We also, based on that alternative, we were able to eliminate or reduce the crashes up to 30% by 2042, including in some places a 22% reduction in the severe crashes as well. So this, as I mentioned, this was a key thing we looked at also going forward. So that's the end of the feasibility study. The feasibility study really looked at needs, it looked at concepts that carried forward, and looked at high-level environmental constraints that we wanted to be aware of. It started to identify potential breakout pieces that could be moved forward into the NEPA phase. And the arrow shows that we are here. For segment 2, we're moving into the next phase of NEPA. That's the environmental documentation process and a formal design process. In this phase, we do start over and we take those concepts that were developed in the feasibility phase, we develop new alternatives and new concepts. We go back out to the public with extensive public involvement and extensive outreach, and we do a much more detailed design moving forward with the alternatives. And so I guess my point with this slide is that the end of the feasibility study does not mark that we've got the solution that we're carrying forward. The next phase is going to look at what it took, the feasibility, and what it took to solve that 303,000 vehicles per day, and move into the next phase and look, okay, how can we refine alternatives, identify new alternatives, and evaluate those alternatives for the environmental documentation. The last 2 slides I have just to show how segment 2 kind of rose to be part of basically the #1 priority out of the feasibility study. And it had to do with the amount of congestion. It's rated very high on the 100 most congested corridors in the nation, so that's one of the things we want to look at. Also, it did provide a lot of relief for the adjacent local road network, as I mentioned, especially in the downtown area and in the UTEP area. It really provided a lot of relief off the corridor as well. The incident management, we were able to, that's one of the key areas for incident management because of the discontinuous frontage roads all the way to Executive Center Boulevards. We wanted to look at how we can provide some benefits for incident management, but not just with frontage roads, but with other items as well. I mentioned the pavement conditions in segment 2 were approaching the need for addressing those, and then the bridges were the other key element. The bridges in the downtown area, because none of them meet the 18.5-foot clearance, are all going to need to be reconstructed to address that. And so that's one of the key areas and one of the key reasons why segment 2 kind of rose to the top. Segment 3, and I'll say segment 3 is more, it's a little bit further out. It's going to be further down the road on the I-10 feasibility study, but there are segments even in segment 3 that are in the not too distant future. But we felt like segment 3 rose to a priority too, mainly because that segment of the corridor has an enormous ramp density. There are a lot of ramps in a very short period of time, and it's creating a lot of friction, not only on the freeway itself, but also in the frontage roads and the cross streets, because all that traffic's trying to get through those cross streets, and it's creating a lot of congestion even off the main lanes of I-10. So that was one of the reasons. And then the same issues with safety and pavement and the bridges as well brought that to rise up to number 2. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the wrap up of the feasibility study. We wanted to kind of just give you an overview of where we are as we're putting the final touches on it, and I guess I'll open it up for questions.
I have a question. Every time I go and I hear about feasibility studies and all of your data, I've always said that data is antiquated and that you guys are always 4 or 5 years behind. You know, you talk about, you know, the traffic. You can go at 2, 3 o'clock and you're going 15 miles per hour today. Not in 2040, not in 2045. Today. Your data is false. It gives us a sense of we having those problems in the future. No, we have those problems today. Okay? Now, we talk about I-10 and so forth in UTIP area, but you don't talk about, and I didn't hear anything on the slides from Zaragoza all the way to Horizon Boulevard, because right now, today, it stops. Right. Go in the afternoon, and it stopped. You don't have to show us that. You can go take a video at it. I can bring it to you. It stops. The freeway is stopped. I don't know how many times I have to address that, but I mean, I get it because we do these feasibility studies for so long that your data, when you want to implement it, and you implement it and we start that project, say that we're going to say, and if we approve stuff, and we say, okay, it's going to start in 10 years from now, and it's going to alleviate X, Y, and Z. Well, X, Y, and Z, not even halfway, you are already to the max. So we're building to alleviate some congestion and not the full congestion because our data is wrong. Because it's so far, and don't get me wrong, because you're not the only one that I say that. Because I've been in TxDOT and I've always said the same thing. Data is so, it takes so long to get the data that when you want to implement something, we're inundated. I mean, it's horrible. Traffic is horrible, regardless, from the west to the east of I-10. It's horrible. We already built, you know, Loop 375 and we expanded, and yet it's to capacity. Today. I tell you, because I drive those roads today.
Yeah, I think one thing.
So it's horrible.
I think one thing to point out, your point's well taken. The one thing to point out is that the models that you're seeing, they don't take into account 2 things. We're assuming that there is zero construction going on I-10 when you look at those maps. I mean, there are no construction at all on the corridor. It's wide open. The other thing we're not showing on there is any incidents. So it's not showing any accidents. It's assuming that it's accident-free on that model. So it's assuming kind of the best case scenario through that corridor. So your point's well taken. I think a lot of what you're seeing today is related to some of the construction that's going on and some of the other things, but we know that there are some areas that are very congested today. We agree.
But just to add to that, if there's no accidents and no construction, it stops. Okay? And it's an everyday issue. We build and we expanded Loop 375, and once it opened, people were like, oh wow. But now, how long has it been open? Maybe 4 years, 5 years? Just say that? And look at, we're at capacity. You know, I mean, we have to think further than what, you know, we're looking at, because I say, you know, we're not hitting our marks. We're not. And I will always continue saying it. We need to better get our data, because it's hard when we build and I get it, we need infrastructure. I'm an infrastructure guy for my city. I cannot stress that to my council, but I stress it out here too. Data needs to be a little bit more refined, because we build them and we're at capacity when we open them.
Yeah, your point's well taken. I think if I had time to show you the egg grade video, not the egg grade, the existing video, we have a similar video showing existing, you'd see a lot of congestion in the current, and once again, that's without construction and without incidents. You'd see the congestion on there. What's happening in 2042 with those higher volumes is a complete breakdown and a complete breakdown of the facility. So,
I mean, and I don't want to, I'm not,
no, your point's well taken.
I'm not, trying to destroy your parade here, but I'm just saying that, we need to address the issue because if El Paso is growing, the county is growing, Horizon is growing, Socorro is growing. It's stretching out, and it's just horrible for our traffic.
You made a point about Horizon, and I don't want you to think that we have ignored segment 4, which goes from 375 down to the 20 hour. We have a group of projects down in that area. Horizon and East Lake are two of the key areas that we're looking at down there for significant improvements. So I didn't want to discount those. I just was, for the sake of time, trying to concentrate on kind of the more congested areas as well.
Can I add, the mobility plan that we're going to be discussing in the future considers adding capacity from East Lake to Horizon Boulevard.
Okay.
Councilwoman Lusada?
Yes, I just had a question when you were talking about technology and truck parking, and you were talking about queuing up offline. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in the feasibility study, we're looking at 30,000 foot views. So these are more ideas that we're wanting to kind of see if we can kind of move forward. One of the ideas we had was for truck parking, but not only just truck parking, also what we would call truck reservations as well. So maybe use the truck parking. We have a couple of places identified for potential where we might stage trucks. Truck parking in general needs to be done for when truck drivers time out on their driving. They need to be, instead of parking in the Walmart parking lot, they have a spot to go to so that they can park their trucks and be safe. But the other part of that, more the technology side, was the reservation part of that, where we can use those truck parking places to provide reservations to the port of entry. So instead of having them queued up like you see them queued up, going into the BOTA port of entry, coming around and queued up on I-10 before the construction started, to avoid some of those things. And that creates more congestion and more friction on the interstate as well. And so that was another idea that we're looking at from a technology standpoint.
Sounds like a great idea.
Questions or comments from the board?
Can I make one comment or question? Can you address a pavement condition on segment 2? My understanding is that segment 2 is the one of all the hot spots you showed. Segment 2 is one that has the worst pavement of all.
Yeah, I don't know, Tomas, we want to talk about this more, but I do know that in the downtown area, right around the downtown area, there is a significant issue with what we think is delamination of the pavement, and it's creating some water to actually bubble up onto the surface of I-10 in heavy rains. You've probably seen it driving down the corridor, and it'll hold water between the layers of the pavement, and then when vehicles drive on it, you can actually see the water squirting up out of the pavement and onto. So there are some significant pavement issues that need to be addressed there, and that's one of the reasons why segment 2 rose to the top.
And then what happens if we have a bad winter?
No gifts.
Okay, so let me address that. Majority of this corridor is rigid pavement, and it's rigid pavement, concrete.
We can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay, so the majority of this corridor is rigid pavement, which is, of course, concrete pavement. Optimum performance on rigid pavement is when you first open the roadway. You're never get, when you look at a performance cycle for rigid pavement, your optimum performance life is at the day you open it, and it's a steady decline from there on out. Now that rate of decline is a lot less than what we call flexible pavement, which is asphalt. But in either case, remediation efforts to bring it back to optimum performance are a lot costlier. Now, in segment 2, one of the remediation efforts that was tried was a dense concrete overlay. They went in there and they milled around 6 inches of concrete and tried to pour another 6 inches on top of it. It didn't bond the way it should, so therefore we have a delaminated layer. Now, in the event of a severe freeze-thaw winter, you could get water in that delaminated layer and you could have some severe pop-outs. So that is one of the main reasons when we talk about distress and potential issues in segment 2 That's why segment 2 rises to the top as far as purpose and need, because we do have a potential issue there as far as payment conditions.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the portion that you described where there's sections where there's more crashes, that particular slide. Do you have data for us to indicate how many of those crashes involve 18-wheelers?
We do have that. I don't have that data today, but we do have that data. That can be something we can provide. So.
Well, I think that's important because I think we all have been concerned about that.
That will be part in the feasibility study report. It will be in there, but that's something we can report back as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions, comments before we move on?
Just to add to our senator, could we have a breakdown of like all vehicles, from motorcycles to regular vehicles to 18-wheelers? That would be a lot better.
We will provide the best breakdown that we have available to us.
No, I know.
It's based on the data that we have. So.
And here we go again with the data.
I shouldn't have said that.
Yes, Stephen.
How many?
Oh,
To count.
11? 10.
And was that, I'm sorry, did we complete the presentation? Or?
Yeah, that was all I had.
6 for private, 7. Wait, Stephen? Elsewhere?
I'm signed up for 4 and 7, so I'm happy to wait for 4, just to keep things moving if you like.
No, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Howard? Burlington?
So the transportation technology sector is going through a renaissance unlike anything that's ever been seen before. The number of projects and initiatives to create whole new types of transportation is in a tremendous growth spurt. And we are facing, in the next 23 years, a much wider range of imagination than we've seen in this reimagined intent. Just one example. How many people here know that there are over 100 funded startups right now in the world developing air taxis? Flying cars are no longer science fiction. Venture capitalists are putting money into flying cars right now with the expectation they're going to be getting a return on their investment within the next 7 to 10 years. And that's just one example. How many people foresaw all of those scooters on the streets? How many people foresaw 23 years ago the rise of ride sharing like Uber and Lyft? And then the combination of how all those things fit together is also exploding. But not only is this creating whole new modes of transportation, it's also changing how we evaluate things we long ago dismissed. So of course, long ago we dismissed the idea that there would ever be mass transit in El Paso, and there never was a need. We just seen that now we finally have the possibility of a need for mass transit, and guess what? We happen to have one of the best hub and spokes rail infrastructures anywhere in the United States, and it's completely unutilized. We have more than 90% unutilized capacity on our rail here. My initial analysis, without any funded study, shows that we have 5 minutes per hour on average of usage and 55 minutes per hour of completely empty space. Now, the technology that's necessary to be able to safely overlay passenger rail on our freight infrastructure never existed till now. But the same self-driving car technology, self-driving air taxi, and those scooter technology, all that new technology we have is all software-driven and real-time data-driven, is going to also allow us to safely put on and take off passenger rail during the average of 55 minutes between freight trains. And that could easily prevent what we saw in this scenario for 2042. But in addition to that, the last mile, first mile problem is also something that has prevented us from ever having mass transit. How are people going to get to the rail or from the rail? But with ride sharing, with things like Uber and Lyft and so on, we already have one of many possibilities there. But just to give you an idea of creative. Okay, more for next time.
Cito Negrón.
All right, thank you all very much. I was very glad to hear the question about pavement condition because I think that's really what this is about. And it kind of got lost in the presentation, and that's one of the reasons why Sunset Heights Neighborhood Association has been so concerned, why other folks have been so concerned. Because while y'all tell us that this is just a study that moving forward to prioritize this, ask TxDOT for $1 billion, is not based on anything other than something needs to be done there. The something that keeps coming up is widening and adding access roads, and that was the presentation that you saw here today. So I hope you all think very carefully about, yes, the pavement needs to be reconstructed. We're not here to disagree with that notion. However, we very strongly disagree with the notion that the highway needs to be widened and that access roads, which is a suburban traffic model, should be imposed on the existing portions of our city, which were built based on the 1925 city plan that we all celebrate. That's the basis of our downtown redevelopment. That's the basis of our neighborhoods renewal. And yet we're talking about taking hundreds or about 100 properties at a cost of about $100 million with $2 million worth of tax base. And unfortunately, I didn't bring enough presentations. I would like to email those to you after this meeting. I think it would be very helpful for us when we get the final feasibility study on this project so that we can start in detail to understand the numbers that they're giving us. Because we know what the impacts of this concept are, and as much as it keeps being said, it's just a concept, don't worry about it, we could change it. This is what you all are being asked to go forward to TxDOT with, based on this data. We talked about population data, right? But according to the numbers that you all have, those are contrary to the numbers that actually exist. We talk about data and projections, right? On slide 8, you showed some population numbers. The reality is that the population between 1999 and 2016 grew at a rate of 0.68%. Yet the growth estimates on slide 7 show double that. The 2045 population projection equates to 1.98% growth rate. 2040 equates to a 1.71 growth rate. Neither of those have been shown to be accurate. We also, I don't know if the models account for the geographic location of where the growth is. We all know the growth is on the far east side, up by the East Montana area, on the far west side. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we come up on the comprehensive plan, because I think the comprehensive plan has moved some projects out of the near future, out of 2020, into 2030 to the detriment of our regional mobility in order so that we can focus on essentially an unnecessary project downtown. So there's a lot more. I'm very limited on this. I would like the opportunity to come back for a fuller presentation similar to what TxDOT had. They have a slideshow. They have a lot of information that needs to be unpacked. I hope you all give us the opportunity to come back for the same opportunity. Okay, thank you.
And if you could just, sorry, once again, state your name and...
Cito Negron, I'm here representing the Sunset Heights Neighborhood Improvement Association and other Central El Paso residents who are increasingly alarmed at how this proposal is moving forward. Thank you.
Anthony Martinez.
Sir, if you could just state your name for the record and your organization.
I'm Anthony Martinez. I'm here as a resident of 506 and a half Prospect in Sunset Heights. Let's agree that this is a political process, and there is data, but there's a lot of room in that data. I'm against the widening of the highway. I think that any kind of capping, any kind of work down there has to be done with a lot of community input and with a lot of thought. Transportation in general seems to be, there's something amiss right now in El Paso with transportation. When Bob Bueller came into town almost a decade ago, he killed the countywide bike share program that this body had agreed on and just pulled the funds. I'm concerned that we've become the TxDOT TTI transportation organization, not the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The MPO, as you know, was created as a regional planning organization that's talking about intermodal, multimodal, looking at technologies to relieve transportation. I'm concerned that the data doesn't include the concept of induced demand. Induced demand is a very important concept because it underlies the understanding, the modern understanding, that you can't build your way out of congestion. You have to design your way out of congestion. If you build and build and build, what you're deciding on today is the beginning of the Katy freeway. And then that freeway in China, that's 2 or 3 football fields wide because you build and you build and you build, and it never stops. I think most of us have been around long enough to remember when we didn't have the transportation problems we have today that you were talking about earlier. Yes, we had spots there were areas of concern, but the current troubles that we see started with all the construction. It wasn't just one big project or 2 big projects. It was all of them all at the same time. So I don't even know if we have adequate or accurate data from the last 10 years to give us understanding of what does our transportation plan look like, or what does our region look like without all this construction? I don't think we know. Also, population projections. Our population has not increased, right? I mean, it just hasn't over the past almost 20 years. So they're looking at 2%, they're making up 2, 3, whatever percent projections to justify build. I'm not sure that that's the way to go. I don't know if we have good data. I don't know if we have the kind of planning that we need to have the kind of community that we want to have for people and not cars going into the future. William Vickery, who was an economist, is the grandfather of congestion pricing, called it our rubber-tired sacred cow. Because even back then, in the 50s and 60s, we were just addicted to this idea of gasoline and cars, not people living in communities that they could live in and enjoy. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Daniel Carey.
Sure, just state your name and organization for this.
My name is Daniel Carey Whalen. I do not represent any organization. I'm a citizen of El Paso. I'm a citizen of El Paso with a degree in urban planning from the University of Kansas. I moved here 7 years ago. I wanted to start off with a quote from David Byrne. Some of you know the talking heads that he called highway interchanges the cathedrals of our time. I think it's so great that, in Texas, of course, represents it even more. So when I think of that phrase, I think of 2 things. I think of, well, why, right? So it's a cathedral, so it's a religious thing. Cars are a religion in this country, and especially in Texas, right? And second of all, what will they look like? So in 100 years from now, and 1,000 years from now, what will be left of the ruins of our society? These wonderful things that TxDOT built, these amazing highway interchanges that are just so, I find them very aesthetically pleasing. I'm a fan of progress, but of course, as we know, as someone mentioned earlier, it's a political word. So whose progress is it? This is a very this trench part of it is a very anti-progressive move, right? We're going back in time. So when I came here 7 years ago, people said El Paso is 15 years behind the rest of the country, and it was true, right? Blockbuster Video was still around when I was here, when I first moved here. We are behind the times. So to me, that's a wonderful, as a progressive person, as an urban planner, that means that we can look into the future. The gentleman here that talked about some of the technology, all of the wonderful things in our future, we can look to that. But TxDOT is a backward-looking institution. They're suggesting, I'm a historian too, urban planning and history are my 2 majors. And the history side, we're repeating history. We're going back to the age of urban renewal. Back in the 60s, when the two major projects, urban renewal and highway construction, destroyed and decimated our communities. We're going back to that time in El Paso, and that's a shame. I mean, we cannot do that way. And as our elected officials, I hope that you really look into it. You look into the other numbers, the presentation that was shown. You know, as an urban planner, I could tell, I know that presentation, right? Scare tactics. I mean, to scare you into believing the worst. And so please be open to progressive ideas. Please be open to not just repeating the past and the mistakes of the past, but moving us forward in a more enlightened way. Thank you very much for your time.
Ms. Debbie Nathan?
Yes, my name is Debbie Nathan, and I'm a resident of Segment 2. That's how I'm representing myself as an individual. I was here last meeting, and I won't take up too much time because I don't have too much more to say. But I am disturbed by the fact that, I mean, anyone who looks at the census data can see that we are actually at this point in time experiencing negative growth. Since for the past few years, the growth rate in El Paso has gone down, down, down to the point now where it's negative growth. So what's disturbing to me is that TxDOT will get up here and give you data that's just false. I mean, it's not true that El Paso is growing. This has been said like a couple of times this morning already, but it's very disturbing to me that such a basic piece of data would be misrepresented. The other thing, the 45, there was a statement about 45 outreach meetings to the public. I know that the Sunset Heights Neighborhood Improvement Association was visited less than a handful of times, but only after they requested meetings. There was no outreach to the organization in Sunset Heights. That to me is also very disturbing. Chihuahuas games, you go to a Chihuahuas game and give out some, I don't know, I imagine leaflets at a Chihuahuas game. I don't think that that is meaningful community outreach. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for people to think and study and critically look at this, at any of this at a Chihuahuas game. So that disturbs me as well. When I was here last time, and I did my own research really just as a citizen, I'm not an urban planner, I'm just a person who lives in Segment 2. And I was so impressed by all of the closures in downtown-style areas all over the world, including the United States. The movement to close freeways, you know, in older, community, very oriented areas, center cities, really. The fact that that's being ignored here is disturbing to me, and as the previous speaker said, not think about that is a step back rather than progress. Mr. Perlmutter, who clearly is really involved in studying these issues, gave us all kinds of examples of technology and movements toward the future, which are resolving a lot of the problems which TxDOT is just looking to the past to resolve. So it's actually for my second time at this meeting, you know, doubly disturbing not to hear these discussions coming out of TxDOT. Thank you.
Dominic Chacon?
Hello, my name is Dominic Chacon. Sorry, I'm kind of tall. So first of all, I want to say good morning and thank you all so much for having this meeting and the work that you do. But I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this entire framework of thinking on this project and the way we look towards the future is built on a false assumption. It's on a faulty premise that there will be an increase, a higher demand of traffic by 2042 by the time I'm 50 years old. When in actuality, there will be an even higher demand for public transportation, not a demand for mega highways. There will be a demand for low-impact mass transportation that serves the public and does not include, again, mega highways. And whatever your reaction to that statement is, whether it's in agreement or disagreement, you should understand that this reality is not my opinion. This is shaped by our environmental crisis. The trajectory that we are on right now cannot continue. This endless development of highways and the inevitable CO2 emissions that come with them simply cannot go on. And that fact is brought to you by the environmental reality. And as Ms. Debbie Nathan said, the information shows actually the opposite. There is an article by Borderzine which says, El Paso County is in the midst of its slowest population growth rate in 80 years, driven largely by a flight of residents to other U.S. communities from the Texas border county, new estimates show from the U.S. Census Bureau. That's not my opinion. And again, it's not by accident that we have an agency that came, and whether it was by benign neglect or not, if I were to present an information at school that had false information, I would get an F. If false information is presented at this meeting, what are we to think that it's by accident? We are on a trajectory that needs to change. But right now, the financial incentives are to allow for growth of all these sorts of industries that are not going to have a place in our future. So I ask you all to reconsider this, and as all the other speakers said, please engage with the community in a much more meaningful way. We are living in a very significant time, and I need you all to ask yourselves, where will you be in the year 2042? How can you really sit here and make decisions that will not affect you directly? Again, by the time 2042 comes around, I will be 50 years old, and the environmental situation will be much worse than what we have now. Our job should be to start mitigating these problems and not perpetuate these problems. We're looking towards you to envision something bigger. And the first step to do that is to fathom the thought. If we can't even imagine what transportation in this city looks like besides just cars and bigger highways, then how can we ever achieve something better? I'm asking you all to tap into your imagination. I'm asking you all to fathom a future where we have mass transportation that helps all people. Again, thank you so much. No false information. Thank you.
Anyone Schwartz?
Good morning. My name is Emma Schwartz, and I'm the president of the Medical Center of the Americas Foundation. I'm here today representing the NCA's Campus Planning Task Force. This is a group that meets regularly, and it includes pretty much all of the campus stakeholders, Texas Tech, UNC, Children's Hospital, the Neighborhood Association, the Housing Authority, etc. And so this group actually met yesterday, and this was part of the discussion. The MCA campus is a rapidly changing and evolving campus, which is really exciting. Over the last 10 to 15 years, the daily usage of that campus has grown from about 3,000 daily users to over 13,000 daily users. So it's really exciting. It's become a major employment center. And our campus partners are very excited to see improvements to I-10. We live daily with the accidents and the traffic and congestion in that area. So we're very excited about that. And the campus partners just want to make sure that they're very included moving forward on the plans for I-10 as their plans are changing. Every 3 years we have to update the master plan because of land acquisitions and changes to the concept down there. So they just want to make sure to be very included moving forward as we see this progress. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion by the board? Again, this item was posted for report. Again, it's a corridor study by TxDOT. It's not posted for action, but what was intended to provide both the members of the board and the public with as much information as possible.
It's 4 and 7.
For item 7?
4 and 7. Stephen Bear? Tracy Yellen.
For item 7?
Item 7.
Bill Volz.
Oh, yes. There's C's here. Here's Steve.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Tracy Yellen. I'm the CEO of the Paso del Norte Community Foundation, the Paso del Norte Health Foundation, and I'm also here representing the Paso del Norte Trail Corporation. About 20 years ago, our community embarked on a project that the Health Foundation was involved in to build the river trail from Borderland, on the Rio Grande River, from Borderland to just about Country Club Road. A few years ago, the Health Foundation recommitted itself to work on extending that vision to create a master plan for a 68-mile trail from county line to county line that you all know as the Paso del Norte Trail. And we have invested resources in partnership with the city and the county and El Paso Water to construct already 3.5 miles of that from Escalante Park to Riverside High School and through other resources all the way to Capistrano in partnership with so many of you. And I just wanted to say thank you for including this project for consideration as part of the mobility plan. It's really great to see these alternate transportation projects included with these larger projects. We have gotten such positive feedback from the residents of that area, and I've seen firsthand how they use that to walk to school and walk to work and ride to recreational facilities, and it really improves and enhances the quality of life in our region. So we thank you very much for your consideration of this project. And other complementary efforts like shared use paths and green spaces as part of all transportation projects, because they really are important to improving quality of life in our region. So thank you. And copies of that if you need those.
Thank you. Thank you, and I first want to thank you for your service on this board. I previously, Steve Ortega, and with the El Paso Chambers Mobility Coalition. I want to thank you for your service on the board. I know it's not an easy job, and there are many difficult decisions in front of us. And a former mayor once told me the easiest way to upset no one, don't do anything. And I know that's not why you're here today seated in your seats. The Mobility Coalition, quite frankly, came to existence because there was concern from the community that after Chairman Houghton stepped off the Transportation Commission, that El Paso's transportation funding would go back to pre-Houghton days. And I can tell you from regularly attending the TTC meetings in Austin, El Paso is an afterthought. The concentration is on what's called the Texas Triangle, and that's the 4 big cities in Texas. And as a community, we cannot afford to punch lower than our weight. And part of punching our weight is making sure that we're speaking with one voice in Austin. I can tell you from the Chamber's perspective, not only when it comes to local businesses, but when we're partnering up with business and leadership in Juarez, their number one concern is the transportation network. And we've heard a lot of concern about population growth. But I'll tell you what is growing at an exponential rate, no one's going to deny this, is the international trade and commerce that's taking place at our region's bridges. And that will only increase if we get the passage of USMCA. And so this is not just about this community, it's about our international region. And I will tell you, as a resident of Sunset Heights, I realize that there is more than just what I think is good for my neighborhood. We not only have to think about what's good for the neighborhood, we have to think about what's good for the city and good for the region if we're going to meet our economic potential. And so I would urge you to pass this plan. Director Calvo has done an incredible job in putting this plan together, making sure that different parts of the community get much needed projects. Let's move forward with one voice so that this community gets what it deserves and that this region can prosper. I thank you again for your service. Have a great month.
Howland.
That's good.
I'm Ted Houghton. I'm chair of the Economic and Transportation Program at the Chamber. And there seems to be a little bit of confusion, but I'm going to talk today about what's you're talking about. There's no action item here, but the one on the mobility plan also. But I will echo what Steve talked about. We're in competition in El Paso, in this region, in Las Cruces, in Juarez, with Albuquerque, Tucson, and Phoenix, and Lubbock, and just go down the list to Triangle, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston, who is scrambling to build transportation, multimodal transportation assets, and brick and mortar, I call it brick and mortar, asphalt and concrete transportation projects. And they're doing it very fast. And if we sit here on our hands, we fall behind like we did years ago. So I commend this group here, but at the same time, I commend a group that has come together across this city to advocate for transportation. We have now Lena, Representative Ortega, on the Transportation Committee of the House, which is so very important to our successes here in El Paso. So I'm advocating for the I-10 project, but I'm advocating for, at the same time, you won't hear me speak again, is for the mobility plan that will come before you. And I want to commend TxDOT, and I want to commend the MPO for what they have done to come together and find projects throughout this region that will enhance the experience of transportation, both for the public and the commercial sector, and to make us a very, very strong, viable economic community, because we are in competition, folks. This is about competition. And you talk about downtown. Downtown has been a bane of the existence of I-10 for a long time, because you've got like two big pipes coming into a small pipe. That's got to get fixed. It is we used to call it at TxDOT when I was in Austin, the throat of the dragon, and that's got to get taken care of and provide for smooth and reliable and safe transportation. So thank you all for your consideration today and your patience listening to all of us. And the facts will come out about these programs to degrade TxDOT and its ability to understand the numbers. They understand the numbers. They hire demographers. We use state demographers to look at these numbers all over the state. And it's not about your growth rate today. It's about this community rate looking out in the years to come. So I want to commend both TxDOT and the MPO for coming together. This is one hell of a plan, and it is huge. The last one we had was in 2008. We had 32 projects. We are now, we're about complete with all 32? We're done. We're complete. This is the next wave of projects for about the next 15 years, about 15, maybe a little bit longer. But these things we have to look, that's the forward thinking that you're going to be hearing today. We've got to look out and provide for our community and for people that are passing through. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
The chair makes it. Can I get 20 seconds, Chair? I used 2:30 of my time. 20 seconds. Real quick. Economic benefit, yes, but there are also costs. There have been costs of construction, specifically in terms of labor hours, human lives sitting in traffic. Due to construction, there have been personal property losses, and there have been life losses. I've never seen a study, I've never seen the data, but I've had conversations with public injury attorneys. I'm an attorney, and so we have these conversations, and they know there might be information somewhere. But I want you to look at various benefits, but there are also costs. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to item 4.
Approval of Council Mobility Plan 2019, Regional Mobility Strategy Report, Evaluation and Prioritization.
For the record, Eduardo Carlos, Executive Director of Direct Field. We are here to present the El Paso Mobility Plan, version 2019. This is the culmination of a lot of work that we have put in, working with all of our stakeholders, with the MPO, with TxDOT, the local governments, including the county, New Mexico DOT, and all that. So what we're going to show you today is a little bit of background on why we need a strategic plan. We've heard a lot of good comments about transportation, some concerns, obviously. We're going to start with the regional mobility strategy, phase 1. If you recall, that was an effort that was started here in the region about a year and a half ago, and the HMPD will be talking a little bit about that. Then we'll move on to decision lens, because you've heard us say here that we need to evaluate and prioritize our projects. one of the key elements of this mobility plan. And then we will finally move on to the details of the mobility plan. We're going to talk about the projects that are included in this plan. And it's more than a plan. I think it's a strategic document. And some of the target implementation elements for each individual project. So for now, let's bring HNPD to talk about the RMS.
Good morning, Board. I'm Kelvin Craker. I'm here with HNPD and on behalf of TechStop and the MPO. I want to share an overview of this RMS study that's been taking place for the last year and a half and some of the high-level findings. This was ambitious. This was different in a positive way. It was a chance to rethink the narrative here. A unique effort on TechStop's part and in partnership with the MPO. Many of you here participated in the process. I'll share some of the listening session findings that we came across, and I also want to point out that this is the second time that we're here at the board. We presented a preview in June, and this is the final presentation for phase 1. So RMS started in 2018, and it was really in response to concerns. There was concerns in past years about a lack of cooperation between agencies here around the table, even a lack of leadership. There was some real struggles going on, and so RMS took a new approach at that. It wanted to look beyond individual projects and individual jurisdictions. It wanted to look at the long term and where we needed to go as a community as we think about quality of life, as we think about multimodal, and as we think about economic competitiveness. It was loosely modeled after something that was done in Dallas under similar circumstances with the city of Dallas. There was a need to reset things, and in that case, in our case, we took it and we modified it to our 3-state and 2-country context that we have here. What's it going to be used for? Well, the purpose of this is to identify big initiatives, identify where we need to go and what our priorities are beyond individual projects, and to find opportunities to create some new partnerships. So RMS, it began with a respect of prior work of previous studies. It looked at a collection of local government studies, corridor studies, rail studies, different modes. And then the second heading there, we got out and we engaged in dialogue. We held 25 listening sessions. Many of you took part in those. We spoke to over 70 people, not just in El Paso. We were in New Mexico. We were in the state of Chihuahua at the state capitol. And we compiled what we heard into themes. I'll highlight a few of those here. Meanwhile, there was these technical analyses taking place on transit, on international bridges, on bike and pedestrian needs, looking across the modes. So that study is culminating now. We have this draft RMS report, phase 1 draft report. We're looking to share an executive summary of it with you today, and it will be published on the MPO's website. Now, TechStop has made it clear this is going to be a living document. There's already plans for more listening sessions and to see the conversation continue. What did we hear? So I'm going to just spotlight 3 conversations, and actually one of them is with regard to the MCA, to the medical center that was here today. I'll first comment on when the TechStop and MPO group sat down with the Borderplex to talk about economic themes. We heard from the Borderplex that trade is key, that commerce across the ports is, of course, part of who we are. We heard about the rail commerce, the international trains crossing through downtown Juarez and downtown El Paso, and how that's an incredible bottleneck with time of day restrictions, with infrastructure restrictions. Borderplex told us about rail-served properties and how that's a real need as they're out recruiting companies, is to identify large parcels that have rail access so we can attract different industries. Borderplex talked a lot about the workforce and about retaining talent in El Paso, about what that means. People want public spaces, they want aesthetics, they want mobility options, the entertainment and the sports options, all things that the Borderplex emphasized to us. When the RMS team went over to the MCA, we heard clearly from Director Schwartz about legislative priorities that were taking place. We heard about that El Paso has this opportunity as as a technology center. It's not just all about real estate, it's about the technology and the industries that already exist and industries that are starting. We learned about medical tourism and how that's a growing trend in Juarez and in El Paso. We heard about the exciting biomedical research, and I think the number was 40 or 50,000 jobs in biomedical manufacturing. Juarez is doing incredible work with automation, with innovation, and with technology incubators. And MCA is very focused on how to bring more of that, and so transportation needs to respond to that in one manner or another. One other story I'll tell you is about the session that RMS had with the Hunt Institute over at UTEP. We heard from Hunt, and they tend to specialize in jurisdictional challenges. We heard about how we have this jigsaw puzzle of jurisdictions here, how we've got different counties and states, and everybody's got their own rules and patterns. It's hard to get all those things working together in one. They talked about it being a cobbling of jurisdictions and even of procurements, and how we need to even revisit some of those decades-old patterns and think about things like economies of scale in buying materials. So RMS captured these things. It related them to the technical analyses. I won't talk a lot about roadway findings. TPB hears a lot about that. There's many efforts underway. We did see a lot of support for TxDOT's 4 Keystone projects. That was clear. It's not a full consensus, but we did see support. But the community said we need to go beyond that to talk about these other modes, these other needs. With transit, the message was clear. The community appreciates investments that have already been made. People want transportation options. RMS was excited to see the work that the county is doing with rural transit and that South Central New Mexico is looking to do. These studies were reviewed and were incorporated. Multimodal conversations, a lot of talk about mobility options, where the future will take us. We heard more about that in the public comment earlier, but clearly there's new modes that are coming, and RMS acknowledges that. With the international ports, everyone talked about the importance of the ports. We looked at the data. There's data that's available, but there's data that's missing. For example, this map shows some pink routes. We took some initial efforts to gather real routes of where traffic is coming from, which side of Juarez to which side of El Paso. Amazing that it's still hard to get some of that data, but we made a lot of progress through this RMS study, and we're on the verge of having access to more and more smartphone and vehicle-based Bluetooth data. A lot of coordination with the City International Bridges Committee, who's doing some very exciting work here. So as I wrap up here, what is the vision? What did we hear from folks? How do we summarize that? We realize that's a challenge. Really, RMS has to acknowledge that it's the start of that conversation. It's not a final conclusion of that conversation, and for that reason, it's going to continue. But it was clear that what people want is a seamless, multimodal transportation network. They want to see that lead to a robust economy, and they want our leadership. They want us to collaborate towards that. RMS helps along those lines, but it doesn't get us all the way there. It's a starting point. We will be reaching back out. We'll be re-engaging community groups, technical agencies. Looking forward to hearing about some of the exciting initiatives that, for example, the county planning department is starting up, or talking with Doña Ana County about their GIS assets. There's a lot of land use scenario modeling that we want to do to support looking at the future. So in the next 1 to 2 years, you'll hear a lot more from RMS as it goes into phase 2. Any questions?
I have one with regard to your slide on the international crossings, on the bridges. And you show in the map the preferred routes, and it seems like on this map, the preferred routes are all sort of like east of the Spaghetti Bowl. What resulted in those being the preferred routes? Or what does that mean, I guess?
Yes, sir, Senator. So this was a sample size of 10 to 20 bridge users that we collected through the city's Bridges Steering Committee. And since then, other steps have been taken. I understand now that there may be sample sizes of up into the thousands. But just we wanted to show work in progress about how it's very hard to be able to get our hands around where traffic starts. This shows the orange and maroon parcels near the Juarez Airport, where much of the concentration is, and then the flow of mostly commercial vehicles towards the Sleda and the Boda ports of entry, and then once it gets into El Paso, uses I-10, 375, US 64 to get to places like the Rojas industrial area or the airport industrial area. So a little bit of data work in progress here.
Okay.
Senator, if I may,
Yes.
yeah, this is a relatively small sample, but we are currently engaged in obtaining more information, origin, destination, cross-border. It is frustrating for us to us here that information is so difficult to get, but it is very important for us for planning purposes. Really understand where the origins for northbound movement. We know where the industrial parks are, and we have an idea where they go. But what drives the choices that the trucks or people make to go to their destinations? So it is one of the most important things that we're lacking. So we are engaging right now in a survey. So that information will be loaded onto our models as well. We saw what happened when we had earlier this year the issue with the migrants that affected the crossing times tremendously, especially for trucks, for freight. And you saw, if they trucks that originated in the industrial parks on the southeastern part of Juarez that crossed all of the city, crossed at Santa Teresa because the crossing times were a lot shorter, and then made their way all the way across El Paso through I-10 and all that to their destination on the east side of El Paso. So, understanding those decisions is very important for us for planning purposes.
Yeah, I guess I was assuming that, and I guess you answered it, I was assuming that you're doing that because you don't want those trucks coming straight downtown, west of the Spaghetti Bowl.
Right.
And that's why the preferred routes are east of the Spaghetti Bowl.
Right. So for planning purposes, it is important for us so that we can focus the resources to address those or to simplify those movements. Clearly, all the trucks that are crossing from Juarez, they gravitate to I-10, right? So it's not just the through traffic that is coming in from California to Dallas and the other way around. All of the trucks that are coming in from Juarez, they need to get to I-10 to deliver their loads in El Paso.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so moving on then to the next part of this presentation. Decision Lens. Roger Williams is going to talk a little bit about Decision Lens, which is a tool that we use to evaluate and prioritize our projects.
Good morning. Decision Lens is a leader in strategic planning for government and performance-related decisions. This is a tool that we've incorporated here at the El Paso MPO that builds on prioritization process that we currently have. The criteria was looked at to rank projects through weighing specific criteria that in the end give you results that Eduardo will present in the next part of this presentation. So the four main criteria that we used were the national goals, and the CMP is the congestion management process, and the strategies that came out of those. So those two top criteria took up 70% of the weight, and it's important that we also added other criteria that is not part of our current process. The national goals and the CMP already are. So the project system is the strategic priority was included in this, and the two of them get 15%. I'll go through the individual criteria underneath each one of those, and you'll see that these things are coming directly from the transportation bills. It was developed back with MAP 21, and in MAP 21, and I say this builds on our current process. This is when the policy board first developed this criteria. These weights that you see here are the weights that went through that process originally. So system reliability, congestion reduction, safety, freight movement, economic vitality, infrastructure conditions, and environmental sustainability. These are not anything new to the process. This is what we've used in the past. So they all play off of each other in all reality. And for the purposes of performance-based planning, this is what all NPOs are required to do since back in MAP 21 and now as incorporated into the FAST Act. So as we break these down, the safety, system reliability, and environmental sustainability, you can see they're a little bit different than the three on the bottom. In the case of those, we looked at each one of the projects and applied to them a weight to rate those projects, and you can see there was either it got a full point or it didn't. Where did we get this information? It started with the agencies. We asked the agencies to provide to us what their priorities are, and that was reviewed by the MPO staff after they submitted to us their project request forms. We added additional data to the freight movement and economic vitality through the Destino 2045 MTP daily freight truck traffic counts that were for 2020. We did give that a little bit more of a range because we can see in the data that they're, the high, medium, and low, and you can see the way we broke them out there. Basically, it's a point or 2/3 or a third. We did the same thing with the infrastructure condition, and that's through we got the data through two sources, the highway performance monitoring system for pavement condition, and then TxDOT through the El Paso district was able to provide more up-to-date pavement condition scores. For congestion reduction, we used the 2019 CMP, which was approved by the policy board last month. This is now an operational document that is required of NPOs and TMA, where you have a population of more than 200,000. So we took that, and we also looked at where the most congestion is at, with a high or a medium or a low, using that document to provide the data to feed right back into the decision lens.
So, can I ask, Mr. Chairman, do you have the actual data that supports the weights that were assigned for each project?
Yes, we do.
Available?
Yes, sir. And in the case of the CMP, it's something that we've worked with to collect that data over the course of the last year or so. We've made a few presentations here to the TV. So for the CMP itself, you're looking at 4 different strategies, and travel demand management is on the top, and road capacity is on the bottom. And the reason for that is the CMP is looking at implementing strategies before you go and put road capacity into your network. So public transportation, traffic operations also very important. The travel demand management, we're looking at things like pedestrian and bicycle, for example, public transportation, traffic operations, a lot of that is geometric type improvements, signalization, things like that. We're looking at doing things that complement, or rather than having road capacity as part of the criteria. So you could have all 4 of these in a project. It doesn't mean you only get one or the other. So there again, you can see the subscores. This went through the process that we're building on now that was previously approved by the policy board with our project prioritization. Each one of those, by the way, either got a yes or a no, so you got a full point or it didn't get a point. Now on the project system, so what is that? We're talking about 3 things: the national highway system, the active transportation system, and the block system. And I'll go into those a little bit more here in just a moment. And then the strategic priority, connectivity, resiliency, and reliability, and scheduling. So on project system, the way we broke these down is if it's on the national highway system, it got a full point. If it has direct connectivity, but not on the national highway system, it got 2/3 of a point, and then a third of a point if it was not on the national highway system. The active transportation system is something that was approved by the policy board by resolution about 2 years ago, and there's corridors in the region that are of high priority. What we looked at is how do those projects relate to the ATS. If it was directly on it, it got a full point. If it had direct connectivity, it got 2/3 of a point. And if it was not on the system, it still got 1/3 of a point. And then the block system. So we're looking at the scale of the project, if you will. We're looking at a project that's within a community, a project that may extend to another community, or a project that is a community project, but it has an impact on the region, and then regionally significant projects that are from region to region. And you can see the breakout there was we divided them into a quarter, and you could get a full point or down to a quarter. Connectivity, very important, and resiliency and reliability. We gave them a spread also of either a full point, 2/3 of a point, or 1/3 of a point. And scheduling, what we're talking about here is we're looking at a project where it needs to go through the development process, but we need to schedule it in appropriately to say, okay, is it ready, or what do we need to do to get at that point where it can start going through the process of project development. What this is everything we just looked at, and this is your criteria tree. It shows how all the weights are applied underneath the 4 main criteria. So ultimately what this does is you take all of your information, you plug it into the decision lens, and you're able to then have projects rank accordingly based on the data, based on the information that we have that goes into that system, if you will. And what you'll see in the next part of the presentation here are the projects that we scored and how they rank.
I have a question. Where does this software come from?
This is they are I think their own development of the software Decision Lens. It's used around the world. It's pretty well known.
So it's used by NPOs and different transportation. Okay.
Yeah, this is a company that specializes on developing this tool.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very powerful tool, but at the end of the day, the prioritization, the evaluation and prioritization is all based on the relative weights that we give to the performance measures.
Okay.
And I mean, it's not magic, right? So that's really the key. And like Roger explained, a lot of the relative weights that we're given to these different performance measures were developed here by the policy board several years ago. We made, I think it's a good idea that we want to go through the exercise again. But this is what we had for this version of the plan, and that's, you will see some interesting results later on. But yeah, it is a tool that is available for anybody to use.
And used throughout the state of Texas?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Actually, we had got access to Decision Lens through TxDOT, because TxDOT is using that same tool to evaluate their own projects at the state level. And I think locally you guys are using it too, right?
Yes, we are. They develop their own criteria. We developed our own criteria. You know, you can take that tool and based on how you put your criteria and your weights in there to score your projects. Thank you.
All right, so let's move on now to the final part of the presentation, which is really to talk about the mobility plan itself. I've been here before you several times to talk about some of the key features of the plan. The intent is to make it multimodal, multi-jurisdictional. We were successful in being able to locate projects throughout the region, as you will see. And not just on this side of the border, but as we were discussing earlier, the impact that these projects have on cross-border movement of people and freight. That is critical for us in this region. We're looking at traditional and innovative funding and financing sources, not just the typical or the usual funding sources from TxDOT. But one of the key goals of this plan that you see highlighted in red We need to be able to communicate to the world what the priorities are for this region. It's one of the things that through RMS and through other exercises, we identified as one of the shortcomings for El Paso in the recent past, not being able to communicate clearly priorities. And the second is consensus. We need to have consensus. Once we approve the plan, we need to have consensus from everybody to make sure that the message is communicated clearly and consistently, whether you're a state rep, whether you're an MPO policy board member, staff, the district folks from TxDOT, the message has to be consistent. If we want to be successful and compete, as you heard earlier in one of the comments, we compete with other regions, not just within Texas. We compete obviously in Texas for funding, but we compete against other regions. So a lot of this is not just to build transportation. We're not doing it in a vacuum just for that. Economic development is one of the key goals that we want to achieve in improving our transportation network. You heard about the growth rates that we have here for the El Paso County, for our region. I'd be scared. I'm scared of that. When you see the rest of the state, the other metropolitan areas growing at a much faster pace, they're taking a lot of our skilled people out of El Paso. We need to keep them here, and a sound, efficient transportation network is critical for that. And then another important thing, this plan really is targeting projects that can be implemented in 5 to 7 years. Some of the inputs for the plan, as you heard, the CMP that was approved, obviously congestion management is one of the main goals for selecting projects. RMS, it's important as well to include it as an input. We went out to the stakeholders. We have these listening sessions to really understand what's out there. And we clearly went beyond the transportation people. We talked to the private sector, we talked to manufacturers, we talked also to people on south of the border. We have meetings with the city, with Ciudad Juarez, with EMIT, which is their planning institute, with the state of Chihuahua. One of the most interesting meetings that we had, we actually traveled to the state of Chihuahua and met in the same room with 3 cabinet secretaries from the state, economic development, public works, and urban development. And in the same meeting, because for us it's so important to understand really what's going on with Juarez, because what happens in Juarez affects us directly. So that was also very interesting to understand. Next, we went to, as part of this process for the mobility plan, we went to the local stakeholders, to all of you, and requested your priority projects. It is important for us to understand what your priorities are. So we received that list. We went through the evaluation and prioritization process through decision lists that you will see, and you'll see the results in a minute. But we also looked at each individual project at their readiness level and their project development schedule. Why? Because that's so important to be able to match funding opportunities, to match the project development schedule, to make sure that those projects are actually, it is feasible to let them when we say that they will let. And then finally, again, matching and optimizing the funding opportunities that we have today. It is, I think, a very powerful message for us when we go outside of El Paso looking for funding, to show that the funds that we do have available, we're using them in the smartest way. That we are actually selecting the best projects, whether they are TxDOT projects, local governments, and we go through a well-thought process. Some of the milestones you see all the times that we've been here presenting to you all. So fast forward to today, or to the month of December. So we presented already this plan to TPAC. And TPAC made the recommendation to TPB for approval. We presented this as a briefing to the executive committee last week. So this is, maybe you're hearing this for the second time. The next steps will be to formalize once we get the plan approval. The intent is to look at each individual project and move individually with the project development for each project. And then moving on, later on, as we develop these individual projects, each project has its own set of approvals for MTP amendments as needed, or TIP, incorporating the projects into the TIP. All those are additional opportunities for public comment as well. So it's not, this is not a done deal. So individual projects will come here to the policy board for approval once we're ready to identify the specific funding sources. All right, so this is a list of candidate projects that we received from all the agencies, from the cities, the town of Anthony, the county, Radisson City, the city of El Paso, Sun Metro, and then clearly we have the TechStop projects as well. So now let's move on to decision lengths and the evaluation. When we were working on this, and again, this is the first time that we used decision lengths, so there was a lot of questions that we had. But one of the key things that was very clear to us at the beginning was that to make a fair evaluation, a fair comparison, it was very difficult for us to mix the TechStop project with the local government. In other words, a freeway expansion project competing against a small arterial, even a reconstruction of an arterial. I mean, it's apples and oranges. So what we decided to do was to separate and evaluate the TechStop projects by themselves and then the local governments. And that was, I think, a very successful thing that we'll see later on. Well, I'm sorry. So here you see the project, the TechStop projects, the way that they were evaluated, and you have that in your handouts. And then for the local government projects that made the cut, they were also evaluated. Now, this is not as important anymore because, as you will see, we were able to fund all of the local government projects. So whether they were the top priority or the lower priorities, all these are very good projects, and we were able to find a spot for them in the plan. So this is the plan itself. You see it there in your handouts. We have the list of projects in the first column, and they're separated in different rows going from the national priorities, and clearly the I-10 projects, segment 2, segment 3, the interchange at Aircraft, those are projects that have national significance. And let me say this also. There was a lot of discussion earlier about I-10. I-10 is not just about us. I-10 is a tremendously important corridor for the country, for the movement of people and goods from west to east. And it goes through El Paso. So it's not just for us. So the national significance is tremendously important. Regional significance, of course, and local significance. The top projects are, when you look at them, they're the top priorities for national significance, but these are the projects that are not funded, except for Aircraft. Aircraft was funded. We were able to secure money from TechStop strategic priority category from last year, but the other two are not. That is why it is so important for us to be able to show that the money that we do have available here, we are spending it in an intelligent way, right? But we clearly need help for additional funding. The projects that you see in red, those are the projects that...
Let me sure. I just want to be sure that members, we did ask that for members to prepare for a little meeting that might be a little lengthier, but I just don't want to lose quorum. Is everyone okay on time? Okay. So we may lose some members, so I just want to be sure. Okay.
Do you know how long we'll go to?
I was expecting until at least 12.
Oh, okay.
So the green is the projects to go.
All right, so the projects there that you see in red are the TechStop projects that are being moved out, that are being pushed out. Why is that significant? Because those projects today are using funds that we can use for the local government projects. So in working with TechStop, we were able to identify, we did our ranking, as you saw in decision lens, and the projects that we're proposing to push out are the ones that scored the lowest. And then, of course, there's other considerations as well. But the fact that TxDOT, that the district is playing ball, is really what is allowing us to find those funding opportunities within the next 5 to 7 years. And that's where we're plugging in the projects that you see in the bottom, which are pretty much the local government projects. They're projects for the city of El Paso, for Socorro, for Vinton, for Anthony, the county as well, Horizon City as well. So we were very, I don't want to say lucky, but we were very happy to be able to find projects throughout the region. But again, this wouldn't have been made possible if TxDOT would not agree to push out some of the projects, the ones that you see there in red.
Is that, Mr. Chairman, is that pushing out some of those projects, is that to free up the funds for
Yes.
the Reimagine project?
No.
No.
No. As you see that in the table, Reimagine only has some of the funds for development and some estimates about for right-of-way and all that, but that's assuming that those are internal TxDOT funds. Construction, there's no money identified yet.
Thank you.
So this is the initial map that shows the location of the projects that are proposed as part of the mobility plan. Yes, we have I-10 on the west side, Sector 2 and Sector 3, but we also see there the Northeast Parkway, which is, again, intended to provide a bypass to I-10, improvements to Montana, but also you see the local government projects for the county, John Hayes, for the city of Socorro, the extension of Hueco Tanks, which, by the way, scored the highest in terms of meeting all the goals. And we also have the project that's the biggest I-10, the widening between East Lake and Horizon Boulevard. That's a relatively simple project for TxDOT, and we're able to find the money for that one as well.
I'll go help you.
All right, so the next slides just show highlights of the table. What is significant, and I hope that you spend some time looking at the columns there for the third and fourth column for the fiscal year letting. The column that shows current, that's where the projects are programmed today as we speak. The green boxes to the right shows where we are proposing to let them down. So most of them are accelerated, which is, I think, a very important thing for all of us here. Again, the projects that TxDOT decided or agreed to push back, it's not that they're bad projects, but they're not needed yet that urgently. So I think this is a much better match, a much better use of our funds as a region. You also see there on the bottom two rows, the plan recognizes the importance of the county of El Paso, the rural transit system, which right now the county is still in the process of identifying or finalizing the routes and identifying stops and all that. But again, this mobility plan recognizes that as one of the priorities as well. And finally, the Paso del Norte Trail, which is also making the plan multimodal. You heard Tracy Yellen speak earlier, but also to remind you that this board already passed a resolution of support for that project, which is a very good project as well. So it is ambitious. It's about a $58 million construction. These are planning level estimates, but we need to go out and find the money to implement it and I know it's going to be built in phases. But again, the plan recognizes that it is one of the priorities. So what are the next steps? We need to work with each individual project. We need to refine scopes, refine cost estimates, and make sure that the development schedule matches the proposed letting date that we have today. And then for each individual project, as needed, we will come back here to the board to amend the long-range plan, the MTP, and any TIP revisions as needed. So that will start as early as next month as well, for each individual project. And with that, I'm open to any questions and more discussion. Just to let you know that, again, MPO staff made the recommendation to TPAC for approval of this plan. TPAC made the recommendation to the policy board, so that takes us to today.
Question. Okay, we're going to pause this forum. Go ahead.
Well, you know, I know that I've been very vocal about this plan, but you know what, I want to thank TxDOT for pushing your project so that us, the small communities, can get our projects done. I think that's a good leap of faith because we need them. You know, I know that I fight you guys for every single penny all the time because, you know, we don't have the budgets that some of you guys have. But I want to say thank you. I know that on the county transportation side, we've been working this for 3 years, and we've already agreed on some on principle that what plans and what routes we're looking at as well. So I mean, I'm glad that because you moved that, we're also going to be able to move transit into the city of Socorro, which is great for our community as well. So I just want to say thanks because it's a lot of funding that you're moving to accommodate some of us. So thank you.
I want to also thank you because you could see, based on the detail that you have provided us, the actual long process that you went through in order to give us our priority plan, which I think is very important when we go to TxDOT and when we go for funding. I also think that it was really a good step that you took to involve all of the local district entities in the process, and I also want to thank TxDOT for placing their projects in a lower type of letting time period. But this is the first time I've ever seen priorities actually being laid out, and you know, I've been sitting on the MPO for a while, and this was something that we had asked for. We've been asking, okay, show us what the priority projects are in order to be able to make decisions. And I think you just did that, and that's why I was also curious about the software. And I think it's great to know that this is a software that's being used in the state of Texas and nationally, and it shows that what we're going to be voting on are projects that have been in the works for years. It's not something that's just happening overnight. And it's a wonderful way to be able, as a board, to make a decision and to vote. So I would move at this time to approve so we don't lose quorum. Second.
We are going to have to hear just a public comment on the item. There is a motion and a second on the floor to approve the item. How many speakers do we have for this?
Do we still have a quorum?
Yeah, 4.
Okay.
You do, Judy?
She just went through
We're going to have to go ahead.
She's still here.
She's at 11?
She's still here.
11.
Will?
So we're required to have the public comment period because it's posted on the agenda. We'll try to go through that as quickly as possible. We'll close here to 3-minute time limit.
Stephen Elser.
Good morning, y'all. I'm Stephen Elsesser. I'm here to read a statement on behalf of Commissioner David Stout. On behalf of Precinct 2 constituents who have contacted my office with concerns, I ask the MPO to take a measured approach that considers their needs on equal footing with the powerful interests driving the downtown portion of the revitalized I-10 concept. Historic neighborhoods and dwellings in or near downtown stand to be raised or placed uncomfortably close to new gateway boulevards as I-10 is widening. People who live in those affected areas are worried. Many positive and exciting developments are happening downtown, and these people fear that the proposed concept would compromise their participation in the continued revitalization we're witnessing. Transportation planning that diverts congestion from downtown will be the best way to respect the rights of individual residential property owners and the buildings in the proposed area affected by the concept. Doing so would also increase their property values, destroying the character and livability of neighborhoods such as Sunset Heights and San Francisco Heights, wrongfully deprive citizens of experiencing the momentum and prosperity that rightly should belong to all of us as downtown's renaissance continues. Furthermore, though the idea of capping the freeway with a new park could improve the quality of place downtown, the significant local investment required to make that a reality should be seriously considered and committed to before taking any significant steps toward making that concept a reality. State money to whiten that agenda that is not accompanied by local investment creating the new downtown park absolutely would be the worst case scenario for people who live near downtown and work here. As a body, the MPO should make sure that does not happen. Some cities have followed a path that drives downtown development that accommodates people who live outside the city center at the expense of those who reside in the urban cores. That should not be our model. Downtown El Paso should be a place where people can work and play, but more importantly, it must be a place where people can live. Not only people from the higher economic strata. El Paso is for everyone. Other transportation projects that would direct commercial truck traffic around El Paso, likely reducing congestion, are worthy of consideration. Borderland Expressway would address congestion-related concerns without picking winners and losers among downtown property owners. Associated decreases in pollution and traffic likely would increase property values of the same people that revitalize I-10 concept would drive out a greater downtown. On behalf of my constituents, I urge all of you, whether elected or appointed, to consider all options as you proceed. My constituents are also constituents of some of you, and their results should be respected. Very truly yours, David C. Stout, Commissioner Precinct 3.
Ralph Richard.
Good morning. I'm Ralph Richards. I'm with Job Concrete. I'm here on behalf, not Job Concrete, Job Materials. I'm here on behalf of both Job and the Chamber's Transportation Mobility Coalition. I want to thank you. This is a complicated agenda, but I think your mobility plan is a big step forward. I really like the way the MPO was able to include in their total list the smaller projects. The Keystone projects are very important, but the smaller projects for the county and others are important. There's a project on there called John Hayes to Pelicano. Most people don't even know where it is. It is an impassable dirt road at this time. Right. But with the improvements that you are presently making, the RMA is making to Pelicano, and the growth on the east side, it is going to become a key connector between Horizon, which you have a number of projects also. And so I really like the list. I really would urge you to approve the mobility plan and to go forward on it. It's going to be a big task. But when you look at the Reimagine El Paso and the mobility plan and all of it, a couple of things we have to remember. It has been pointed out, I-10 is a main east-west corridor across the country. The next primary east-west corridor is 300 miles to the north in Albuquerque. I-10 offers unique transportation connections for the entire southern part of the country, in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. Also, we have a situation here in El Paso in which we have a city divided by the Franklin Mountains. They're beautiful, but they are what caused the pinch. It is not possible to move a mile or 2 miles north and put another corridor in. The mountains have created a situation in which you have the pinch. He had a term for it earlier. El Paso. Through El Paso, through downtown. So things like the Imagine El Paso are long-term. It will help define where we're going in this region. And your mobility plan, I think, is great. I really urge you to pass it. I appreciate your time. I know it's been a very long morning. Thank you.
David Jerome. David Jerome.
He was here. I think he left. We lost Mark.
Anthony Martinez.
No.
Anthony Martinez.
He's gone.
He's gone. Silvio Romero.
Thank you. I know it's been a long morning, and 3 minutes really isn't sufficient to address all of the issues that come up. So I ask again to be placed on a future agenda for a more robust discussion, because you all will be faced with future decisions related to this project. This is not the only time that you'll be addressing this, and as it goes through different tips, whatever all these different lists are, that very few of us really understand, you'll be asked to make more decisions, and there will be design decisions coming up. With that said, I want to respond to a couple of things. One, while I'm representing Sunset Heights, and it's very important to us, this is not a parochial interest that we have. This is about the future of downtown El Paso and all of the neighborhoods around there, and of the entire community and how we move around. Contrary to what was said, this is not the only east-west corridor. The Pass of the North is not only that pinch point. I thought that until very recently. You know, that box canyon by Asarco, that's not the Pass of the North. The Pass of the North is this region, and there are multiple ways to get around the region. There's Trans Mountain, which we know is not a great place for trucks because of the grade, but there's also the Anthony Gap, which is why I'm so happy to see the Northeast Parkway on this project and scheduled before the downtown piece, because that will give us data we need to know in order to really assess the downtown piece. And so I have a petition here. I'm happy to leave a copy. More than 200 people signed it in just a week, asking for y'all not to make this decision today to prioritize this project. Now, I can read the politics of it. It is a political process. I see that there's the movement to go ahead with this stage of it. But there's a few things on there that are a little disturbing. For example, Spur 601, where it enters Loop 375. That is one of the worst congestion points in El Paso, because there's a red light there. People who now live off of East Montana and work at Fort Bliss, they go down Montana, up Loop 375, and across Spur 601. The hospital hasn't even been built there yet, and it's already a choke point. So I think the price on that project is $23 million. So for $23 million, you can fix a very significant choke point that is affecting the people where the community actually is growing. And yet we've swept that money in order, I know the senator asked the question, is that money being swept in order to do this project? Well, not directly. It's being swept to address the needs of local communities that have been pushed aside for far too long. So now y'all are getting what you need, but the price is that we're pushing that project, which we need now, into 2030, so that when we go to TxDOT to ask for $1 billion for downtown, we're able to get that. So that's an example of the trade-offs that don't make sense in order to make this done. And I invite any of you to go to Spur 601 during rush hour and see what I'm talking about, and wait till the hospital is done. So some of these things don't make sense. Some of the things that do make sense, that I'm very happy to see there, because as a neighborhood, we support this multimodal. I think the Paso del Norte Trail is a fantastic concept, revolutionary on multiple levels. I hope we get that done. And County Transit, we did a great job negotiating that into this deal, and I hope we do more of that in the future. Thanks.
Jim Smith?
Good morning. I'm Jim Smith, and I have a very distinct honor in a whole bunch of ways. And number one, as a citizen serving the public in this community and the region. I also happen to be a member of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board. But more importantly, what I'm standing here for is I've been graced with the opportunity to serve as the chair for a dynamic coalition of all the stakeholders for the Borderland Expressway. The white paper that everybody is going to have here pretty much explains what that is. But we meet monthly and have been doing so since November of 2016, working for the good of this community. I can't tell you how impressed I am with all of the entities involved. New Mexico, Texas, city, county, the MPO, the RMA, and all of the different governments, how they work together. And more importantly, a voice that isn't heard very often. I know it's in the heart of many of you, and that is the voice of the Army, Fort Bliss. The Army can't stand up and speak for itself. It depends on all of us here who represent them. And many of you know that my roots go very, very deep into Fort Bliss and the Army. I became interested in this project way back while I was still on active duty in the 90s. So the Borderland Expressway, the Northeast Parkway, and all the improvements that are in this fantastic regional mobility study and in this fantastic thing that MPO has done are very, very important to all of us who know and love the military and their contribution to the community. Again, it's really a great pleasure for me to be able to represent this group, this ad hoc committee of all the stakeholders in New Mexico. God bless them. I mean, they come up to the table in spades. They were funded for their portion of the Borderland Expressway. And I'm looking forward to the day we can drive the Golden Spike on the border there between the Texas and the New Mexico portion. So thank you very much for your time. I love you guys. You're an absolutely great body. And I thank you, MPO, and all of the members for putting together such a fantastic plan. Thank you.
Daniel Carey Wheelan. Daniel Carey Wheelan. Debbie Nathan.
I'm glad because of the time constraints, and I think that the arguments against prioritization have been made, and I hope you will keep them in mind. Thank you.
Steve Ortega.
He's gone.
Chet Howard. Judy Gutierrez.
Good morning. I'm here to read a letter on behalf of Representative Anello. I want to express my concern over several initiatives being pushed as priorities today and the timelines and processes around them. Too many people who live in affected communities are not aware of the proposal, and many of them live in my district. Both segments 2 and 3 involve serious, irreversible changes to the makeup of El Paso, with segment 3 being the most concerning. I drive these areas daily and I understand the need for improvement, but the data does not support widening the highway and adding frontage roads. Progressive cities do not destroy neighborhoods, especially in core areas, to make way for more lanes. The neighborhoods which are suggested to be destroyed and exits proposed for closure have a large impact on years of work and collaboration from both north and south of the interstate, with large investments from the City of El Paso, the Housing Authority of the City of El Paso, the Medical Center of the Americas, and the County of El Paso. This is much more than a highway design. It is a spine through central El Paso. What do we want the space to be used for? Interstate and truck traffic, or connectivity and community development to enhance the rebirth of downtown and its surrounding neighborhoods, from Chamizal to Austin Terrace to Manhattan Heights. El Paso has a historic core built around a classic street grid system. It serves residents well. Imposing a suburban highway model through the heart of the community is against our planning values, and we need more inter-neighborhood connectivity, not less. I understand that there is a public comment portion of these projects. However, based on the timelines submitted, I do not think it is lengthy enough to entertain as much community input as needed. Given the lack of information to the public and the rising community concern, I would kindly ask you to postpone the vote today until there is a design concept that is compatible with the community I represent. Sincerely, Alexandra Anello.
Well, thank you for the board members for staying, for such a lengthy process, but yet an important one. I do want to thank TxDOT and MPO and all of the stakeholders here on the board who provided input. For those of you who have served on the MPO for several years, one of the biggest complaints was that it seemed that TxDOT's projects, particularly in their 10-year plan, seemed to take priority. And when those projects came forth to the MPO, it felt like there wasn't much ability for local entities to provide input to get their projects, to move forward. This plan it seems well thought out, where every local entity had the ability to provide input, and so I'm pleased to see a diversity of projects, throughout the region. In a region as large as ours, we're never going to get 100% consensus. But we do, here at the MPO, have to identify priorities, that are important to our region. We may disagree on some of those priorities, but we do our best to reach as much consensus as we can. And I think this document, at least on the time that I have served on MPO, is the most comprehensive, effort, to achieve a coherent list of priorities that will serve as, again, a living document as we move forward. This isn't a final document. There's going to be other opportunities for board members, for agencies, and for the public to provide input.
Mr. Chairman, I know there's a motion and a second, so we're coming up on the vote. I had one additional question that came up because of some of the comments that were made. If I could ask that question, I don't know whether it's Mr. Calvo or TxDOT, before we take a vote, and that is alternatives to this I-10 trench project, segments 2 and 3. Were there alternative plans looked at that could avoid what people have articulated here, and that is destruction of certain neighborhoods, using eminent domain and so forth? Were there other concepts? This one's being referred to as a concept. Were there other concepts that were discussed and looked at in detail to see if we could avoid some of these issues that have been raised here today?
Do you want to take that, or? Yeah, that's fine, I'll take it. There are always alternatives when we look at a corridor study. To be honest with you, I kind of take offense when we talk about destroying neighborhoods and eminent domain. We don't know what it's going to look like in its final phase. This was simply a corridor study to assess purpose and need. We have not designed it. We have not gone through the NEPA process on it. So to think that it's in its final form is beyond where we're at. So yes, other alternatives were looked at, but
what other alternatives?
Everything from looking at capacity on Border West to Borderland Express. The no-build option is always looked at. So those were all considered.
Senator, let me add to that. At the feasibility level, and I know they did it for Reimagine I-10, but we've done this on feasibility. It's a lot about researching. It's a lot about discovery and looking at really understanding the needs for the corridor at the feasibility level, and then you start testing concepts. And I know that the TxDOT team came up with different concepts and all that. What they have right now is sort of like a concept. It's sort of like a typical section that could work throughout the corridor. But first of all, it's not cast in stone yet. And when they go to the next phase, everything is on the table. Right? Yes, one of the products of the feasibility is to start testing some concepts, some ideas. We need that. For example, to put that project into the plan, we need to have a ballpark idea of what the cost is, right? But once the TxDOT starts the NEPA process, it's like pretty much like starting from scratch. Everything's on the table, right?
Right.
Yes, you have some ideas. You already have, you know what the issues are and all that. But also, one of the really good things about doing the feasibility study is the public involvement portion. Because, like I think Bill mentioned it in the training session, you don't want to go and be ready to let the project and then find out that there's that the community is not in support. I mean, that's exaggerated, right? But that's why it is so important at the feasibility level to go out to the public and, you know, have these meetings so that you can work. You hear what the issues are, what the concerns are, and TxDOT has to take those into consideration as the project moves forward. The other thing that I want to say is also under the NEPA process, the no-build alternative is also on the table. Do nothing. That's always on the table.
Well, let's hope that we have a robust process on that, because my experience is once you say we prioritize this project, and once we move monies around so that there's monies actually available for this project down the line, pretty much the train is taking off. And there may be some of these hearings, some of these public meetings, and I hope that the public participates, you know, in large numbers because of the concerns that were expressed here today. Because I think I agree with those who say that this project is going to change the character of downtown El Paso, and is going to change the region, not to mention some of the concerns about going to the past as opposed to looking into more future modes of transportation that are not reliant on more vehicles on the road and more emissions and environmental impacts. I brought up last month's meeting, because it's in the materials again today, the ranking of the criteria for environmental sustainability. At 2.6 is way down at the bottom. It seems to me that, you know, given El Paso being in a non-attainment area and all the concerns that we have about climate change, that we would be looking at that as a much higher ranking, but that's just my view. So anyway, I think you answered my question. I'd be more interested in finding out what went into some of those alternatives and why they were rejected. We do have an experience, I have an experience that hopefully will play out with this particular project, and that's, of course, the flyover over the Lincoln Center. And there were all of these public listening sessions. There were the environmental impact and so forth. They started out with about 6 different alternatives, and we were being told at the beginning that the best alternative was, in fact, to go right over Lincoln Center, historic building, and we were going to have to tear it down. But thankfully for the Lincoln Center Conservation Committee and others that got involved in trying to save Lincoln Center because of its historic value to this community, TxDOT eventually selected a different concept that we could all live with. And so hopefully that would be what happens with this one. But I think there are some very legitimate concerns here with this massive project.
And again, just to be clear, you know, again, we're not voting today on any particular specific design. You know, the Senator, as you described, you know, regarding the Lincoln Center, you know, if funds are attained, you know, we'll go through a design and a project development process where all of these issues will be discussed, and the public will have an opportunity to do that. But for the sake, you know, and I hope that each of us here as board members are very clear on that as we explain that to our constituents. I hope members of the public who are here in attendance, we appreciate the comments, but again, you know, this is a planning organization. This is simply, again, to identify priorities. But there's no specific design that we're approving today, and that's not what today's vote is. It should also be noted that, again, these projects, unlike the local projects, are not funded. It's going to be incumbent upon the members of the MPO, our state delegation, other advocates for our community, to go to the Texas Transportation Commission, and most of this is coming from discretionary funds. And so the Texas Transportation Commission is ultimately going to have to say, okay, El Paso, well, here's $2 billion worth of projects. I mean, that in itself is going to be very difficult to do. But just so we're clear, you know, that we're not voting on any specific design, we're not voting on any specific project.
That answers comments. I think what the Senator just did is reaffirm the fact that the NEPA process works. And we do listen to public input when we get to that stage. But this mobility plan is a lot bigger than one project.
Exactly.
But 5 months ago, when I walked in here, when I walked out, I would have sworn I was at the Tower of Babel. Everybody was speaking a different language. Everybody wanted the same thing, they were just saying it in a different way. And I think Eduardo and his group and working with Eddie out of my staff have done a really good job of identifying regional transportation needs. And that's what we're here to vote on. What they look like and their final delivery is down the road, but I think this gives this region a unified voice as to prioritizing what they feel is important to their individual areas and to the region as a whole. So I just want to say that we're here to vote on mobility plan and not specific projects.
With that being said, I think we should go for a vote.
The motion was made by.
I made that motion.
I'll second.
We're taking
Or whoever seconds.
So you're okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I am going to be opposed. I like the plan. I congratulate the MPO for developing a great mobility plan, except for the fact that, and I understand the chairman's points, that we're not voting on any design or any construction at this stage. It's very premature. We are, in fact, in adopting this plan, adopting a priority for the I-10 project, segments 2 and 3. And that's what causes me some heartburn here in prioritizing a project that seems to me we ought to gather a lot more community input and, yes, go through this process, but I'm just not able to support it for that reason. I support all the other things that are in it, but not the prioritization of the I-10 project. So I'm a no.
Any abstentions? Motion.
Item number 5.
The remainder of the action items, and being respectful of board member time, which are the highest priority that we can kind of 5 and 6.
Item 5 to amend the Vecino 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Vecino 2019 Transportation Improvement Program to program prioritize use of the project from the 2020-2022 Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Call for Projects. Number 1, Castle Road, shared use tax and distribution.
Good morning, Greg Nickel, Chairman of the TPAC. Item number 5 here is there's some transportation alternative set-aside funds that were set aside, and this is in 2022, correct? If I remember right. Yes. And we've got this recommendation. The project applications were brought in, they were scored. You've got the scoring in your packet, and then we proceeded based on the ranking. We're recommending a task force project for you for approval. There is a fund balance in 2022, and just to make y'all aware of that too, the other project was an El Paso project. This would fund some of that, but we're not making that proposal right now. So those funds will just sit out there for right now. We'll do another call if necessary.
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to approve the item. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Next item.
Approve December 2019 project readiness report and corresponding potential impacts to the IPO TPB.
I'm going to give you a real quick synopsis on this one. We've got 3 projects in this list that are of high alert. They're on high alert because they deal with conformity issues. We have talked to the agencies. Most of these, I think, are textile projects. One of them you're aware of is causing us to revise our Casino plan. It has to do with the utility, the gas line relocation that we have to deal with, and the other 2 are in a similar thing. Not similar, they're conformity, they need to get finished. The projects are out there, they're underway, so Those are the 3 that are on high alert. We've got 5 that are in medium alert. And it's due to environmentals and PS&E documents that are not quite where we want them to be, but we've been reassured by the agencies that have them that they're on their way and they're okay. And then you've got 3 that are in a low alert. These are projects that are 2 years out, and that's why they're low, dealing with a variety of different things. And so there's times to do this. This has been a good document for us in the TPAC to review projects, make sure things are on course, and so that we're not having to move projects around. And that's what I'll remind everybody that's what the nature of this report is. So just bring attention to it, make sure everything's okay, and then our recommendation is to you just to approve the report.
Is there a motion to approve the readiness report?
Motion
to approve.
Motion and a second to approve the readiness report. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank you.
Item 8, since fiscal year 2021, 2024 TIP and Texas State Transportation Improvement Program.
Roger Williams, El Paso, New Mexico. So every 2 years we have to develop a new STIP. This is a Texas STIP, and we're on track right now. We're developing the projects that will go into the 2 additional years, 23 and 24. We'll be bringing this back to the policy board in about the May timeframe for your recommendation for approval, and then we'll submit it into the to the state to go through the state process to get incorporated into the new STIP, and it will be the new STIP for the fiscal year 2021. That's it in a nutshell. If you have any questions. And on the next.
Number 9, amendment of the state 2045 NCP and transportation improvement.
So what we have here is a timeline that was developed for the amendment to our Destino 2045 MTP. This is being driven by a TxDOT project that has been talked about here at the policy board. It's the Loop 375 project from Montana to the spur. This project is going to be delayed because of the pipeline utility that belongs to Fort Bliss. It will therefore impact our conformity. And because of that, we're going to have to amend our 2045 Destino MTP. The regional mobility plan also recommended and was approved today will have projects that also impact conformity. So we'll be taking that document and looking at projects that are crossing network years, for example, because we're accelerating local government projects that are in a future network, and they need to be moved into a nearer network so that they then can go through the analyses for conformity. So what we're going to be doing here soon is coordinating with the consultation partners to develop our conformity document and to get fiscal constraint on all the projects that are impacted. And this will go through a process that will include public involvement. And what we're going to do, this timeline is going to be adjusted. The previous item for the STIP, that timeline and this one are basically, we're going to line them up so that we get all of that work done at the same time. We'll be moving projects, some projects that come out of the regional mobility plan and go into the MTP will also be incorporated into the new TIP and go through the conformity process at the same time. So this timeline, again, will be extended a bit so that we do incorporate all those documents together. Questions?
So we can't have. No.
And then we're back.
We're back. Are we back? We're back.
Okay. Questions?
That's all right. We're not voting, so I felt comfortable
Item number 10, reduction of the Texas CMAQ budget 2023-2027 and impact to EPMPO planning documents.
So we've talked about a little bit in the fact that San Antonio is now non-attainment. And when they came into the non-attainment realm, our CMAQ funds were impacted. So there's no new CMAQ funds. There's only the original CMAQ funds, but the pie is being split up by now more entities. So that has an impact on us, and we've already adjusted our TIP document, so that goes through 2022. Now you can see up here where we've got some more issues as it relates to the CMAQ. You can see the reds there. And then you can see the projects underneath. We're coordinating with the entities now, and actually it's Sun Metro and the City of El Paso will be looking to adjust the scopes or make other decisions on how to get back into fiscal constraint. This is just a report right now. We'll be having this conversation at a future TPAC and bringing it back to the TPAC. We are looking into the reconciliation right now. We will have a report at the next TPB. What we're looking at is CMAQ and others as well. So especially Category 7, not to get too far off the subject, but Category 7 has been impacted by about $15 million, and which throws us into a negative balance in Category 7. So we'll be looking to make some adjustments to address that. And also, we're looking at the CMAQ right now. We believe we are going to be in, from a reconciliation standpoint, a lot better off than we were with the Category 7. But this is still an issue for us. It is, as far as the CMAQ funds go, the fact that we have had a reduction in our CMAQ balance. Again, we'll come back with a more robust report on the reconciliation at the next meeting.
Just to be clear, when you said there will be no more CMAQ funds, there will be no more additional CMAQ funds.
There will be.
We're not losing CMAQ funds, right?
We're apportioned a certain amount of CMAQ funds. We still have that same apportionment. But then when San Antonio came into the mix, they split up all of the CMAQ funds from the other non-attainment areas, and then they reduced us by about $2.5 million. So actually, we are losing.
We're losing, but we're still getting the appropriate.
Oh yes. As long as we're in non-attainment, we'll continue to see. This is the split is between all the non-attainment. So,
yeah, Roger, on the mobility plan that we just approved, it was the county's got $6 million of CMAQ money for 3 years, I think, in 2021. And I don't see anything in 23 or 24 for CMAQ with the county service.
So in 2021, 22, and 23, we'll be looking for $2 million for a total of $6 million.
Right.
Now, this is on top of this other issue here. So those are things that we need to be looking at on how to fund the transit for the county and how this is going to be impacted as well. So there's only this amount of CMAQ funds. We will have to be looking for how to adjust the projects.
That plan for their operations.
Could you repeat what you said about El Paso? How much is El Paso going to lose because of this?
About $2 to $2.5 million per year.
All right, so should I do this brief or do you want to stay longer? All right, so very quickly, you see there in your packet, the first bullet, the consultant agreement for tribal demand model is going to come your way next month. This is just a heads up. We completed almost completed the procurement, the negotiations and all that, but the contract will come to you for execution next month. Next, some of the conferences, workshops that we have attended, the MPO staff and others. The Texas Mobility Summit 4.0 that was held in San Antonio. I believe some of you guys attended as well. It was a great opportunity really to think outside the box There's a lot of innovation involved with that. But as we hear, or like we heard, several of the comments earlier this morning about more philosophical issues about, what are we really going to do in 20, 30, 40 years to really deal with mobility? I don't believe it's just about technology, right? Connected automated vehicles is not the solution. There has to be also a solution on demand, land use, and all that. But this summit was very helpful. I encourage you all to attend as well. El Paso was very well represented, which is again very good to see. The City of El Paso staff, MPO staff, the Chamber was there, the Mobility Coalition. Who am I missing? The TxDOT District, of course. And the good thing is that through the leadership of the city, and Yvette, I don't know if Yvette is here, but it looks like we are going to host this statewide mobility summit. Actually, it's national. So we'll be able to host it here in El Paso next year. I don't know if it's a done deal, but
I have a call on Tuesday with the organization.
Perfect. All right, the next item, New Mexico MPO Quarterly, just to let you know that we hosted that meeting here in El Paso 2 weeks ago. It was the quarterly meeting. They were very excited to be in El Paso and especially to ride the streetcar. And thank you very much, Sun Metro, for accommodating the rides and all that. Number 3, the value capture workshop, also very important for us. Federal Highway organized these series of workshops on value capture that really deals with innovative funding mechanisms like transportation reinvestment zones and others. Again, very well represented from El Paso. I was very happy to see that a lot of the presentations showed El Paso, highlighted El Paso. Terry Quesada worked some down for you. Her presentation was really to describe how the Horizon City TRZ works. I did not know all the details, and it's great how you guys were able to work with the county with the vehicle registration fees to accelerate. But I encourage, again, all of you to attend these type of workshops. They're very, very useful. The next is a Freight Advisory Committee meeting. This is another statewide committee that TxDOT runs. I was not a little disappointed in the sense that the attendance from El Paso was not very, very good on this one. It's a tremendously important committee. Again, representation from the rest of the state. When we talk about competing against other regions, especially against other border regions, the city of Laredo or the Laredo region always shows up. The mayor attends all of these statewide committees. He's always there, and of course, that's a recognition of how important cross-border trade is for them. So we're hoping to get more representation and more attendance to that committee as well. And I'll be talking individually to some people to see how we can work that out. Finally, the upcoming events. Transportation Research Board, TRB, is coming up in January. Again, that's the biggest conference on transportation, I would say, in the world. If you all can attend and have the budget and the stomach to be out there in Washington, D.C., that would be great. There's so many different topics, from planning, technologies, to not so much interesting topics. I'm sure Tomas is going to disagree on pavement design. But so anyway, so that's coming up. And then finally, the Texas Transportation Forum. This is again a yearly conference that Texas has been putting together for about 12 years now, 12, 13 years. Again, it's a big conference. It's driven more focused more on policy type of things. So I know that many of you have attended, and I've always enjoyed that one. I think it's a really good conference to attend as well. So with that, Roger, anything else? I'm done.
Thank you. Do we have one? That's it.